Exterior wall requirements. This chapter covers the outside of the building, including things that, and incorporates a number of things that we've been doing by memos or interpretations for a number of years. It puts them all in one place in the code. Covers a range of topics and some newer exterior cladding materials that are popular, but we didn't necessarily have a lot of guidance on, or our guidance is hard to find. So specific requirements for a wider range of cladding materials, it's going to spell that out. It's going to provide up-to-date standards on those things, so to the extent there were standards in our code, often they were quite old standards that were referenced. The requirements for combustible cladding materials on the exterior side of exterior walls will be very similar to the 2018 memo for people who are dealing with those cladding products, the metal composite panels, the HPL products. And then the standards, again, because they are up to date, are going to be consistent with readily available manufacturers' test data, because we're one of the first cities in the country to actually be on the 2018 edition of the I-codes. In some cases, we might now be ahead a little bit by an edition or two of the manufacturer test data, and we'll work with you on that if that becomes an issue. Some overly prescriptive requirements in the exterior wall chapter were deleted by the Technical Advisory Committee, so recognizing that we were moving from a world that had very little in the way of spelling out nailing patterns or spacing of fasteners to a world where the IBC has a little too much of that. Some of that is not being adopted by Chicago, at least for now. The provisions for combustible cladding, like the 2018 memo, really do allow those materials, but in a way that's a little more restrictive than the base IBC. It cancels out some of those exceptions that would allow things to be used a little too liberally. EFIS without drainage continues to be a prohibited material. It's prohibited today, and the Technical Advisory Group thought it really did not work for Chicago's climate, so it continues to be banned. And there are some provisions at the end of the exterior wall chapter about plastic composite decking. It's there, it can be used, but it's not suddenly becoming a non-combustible material. We get that question a little too much. So it is still going to be subject to those limitations on being a combustible material and how close it can be to property lines or based on construction type. Chapter 15 covers roof assemblies and also rooftop structures, so those occupied rooftops and mechanical penthouses. Beginning, it starts out with roof drainage, and roof drainage we're going to come back and look at again some more in coordination with the plumbing code, because that's an area where we know there's some things that are a little Chicago different, but it really is tied into the plumbing code and will be covered later this year or next year when we look at that. There are some more performance requirements around roofs and rooftop structures, more spelled out than today. I think our code today, probably half a page, contains all our roofing standards, and now it's going to a chapter that's 20 or 30 pages long, and hopefully provides some more clear guidance than our code today. Material-specific requirements, so it lists out a range of materials that are allowed or not allowed and the conditions under which they are allowed. And then we get into the unoccupied rooftop structures, so that's modified provisions from the IBC. And then towards the end of the chapter, there's some Chicago-specific things we added. So there's a provision on those occupiable rooftops, which is our new name for rooftop decks. Vegetative roofs and roof gardens, those are borrowed from the International Fire Code and amended a little bit for Chicago. And then our longstanding requirements for solar reflectance school roofs. The provisions that are in the model code about re-roofing and roof repairs, they didn't really fit in the building code, which is generally about new construction, so they've been relocated to the building rehabilitation code, which is where they really apply. You're not going to be replacing a roof on a new construction building, hopefully, or you shouldn't be getting a permit for it, separate from the base building permit. And those green roofs and vegetative roofs are going to finally have some standards that are a bit more spelled out, so there's a little more consistency and clarity about what our expectations there around those. For the unoccupied rooftop features, the Chicago requirements are going to be a little more tailored for us, and then for the occupied rooftops, that is going to spell out those requirements. It's going to largely be consistent with, again, we did an ordinance around some of those topics 2 or 3 years ago, So it's going to be largely consistent with that, but put it in language consistent with this new code that we're adopting and the rest of the country speaks.